My name is Prince Khalid bin Rashad Al Saud. I am 29 years old, and on 11th August 2020, I should have been beheaded in Jeddah's public square. Instead, at the exact moment the executioner's blade began its descent, the chains on my wrists shattered like glass, and a light brighter than the desert sun exploded across the execution ground. Let me tell you how a Saudi prince came to kneel before an executioner's sword, and how Jesus himself stood between me and death. Hello everyone. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, like the video and share with loved ones, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's continue. I was born into absolute power as the second son of a respected Saudi governor in the royal district of Tabuk. My childhood unfolded within limestone palace walls older than the kingdom itself, where servants bowed at my shadow and tutors whispered my future into existence before I could walk. I had diplomatic immunity that could cross any border, security details that moved like shadows, and access to wealth that could silence problems before they became scandals. My father boasted that I would one day govern our province with unshakable Islamic conviction. Yet despite being surrounded by everything Allah could provide, I felt like I was suffocating behind a golden mask. From the time I could speak, I memorized verses from the Quran. By age 10, I had completed the entire book, a source of immense pride for my family. I trained in Islamic jurisprudence, studied military strategy, mastered diplomatic protocol, and learned how to carry the weight of a name that opened every door in the kingdom. My future was carved in stone: strategic marriage, provincial leadership, legacy preservation. I performed every religious duty with precision: 5 daily prayers, Ramadan fasts, Hajj pilgrimage, generous zakat. I had everything a man could want. Yet I couldn't escape the haunting question that whispered through my perfectly scripted life: why does obedience feel like imprisonment? Everything changed in October 2017 during my postgraduate studies in London. I had joined an exclusive international leadership club, something designed to polish my diplomatic profile and expand my global network. These were carefully curated evenings with future prime ministers, corporate heirs, and policy architects. Safe, predictable, beneficial. But on one particular evening, the script broke. A quiet Nigerian girl named Halima stood up to share her journey. She spoke about poverty that would have killed my servants' children, about hunger I couldn't imagine, about darkness I had never faced. Then she said something that seemed to stop time itself. Everything changed when Jesus walked into my life. I expected the room to erupt: mockery, perhaps offense, certainly discomfort. We were diplomats in training. We knew which topics to avoid. But instead, there was only silence. Not the silence of judgment. The silence of reverence. Her testimony didn't sound like religious performance. It sounded alive. After the meeting, I approached her, carefully, casually, as if making polite conversation. But something in my voice must have betrayed my hunger, because Halima smiled knowingly and pressed something small into my palm. A USB drive. You seem like a man searching for something, she said softly. I should have immediately destroyed it. I should have remembered who I was, a Saudi prince carrying a device that could contain anything from state secrets to spiritual contraband. But instead, that night in my London flat, I found myself plugging it into my laptop with trembling fingers. Inside were videos. Dozens of them. Underground believers across the Middle East, Iran, Egypt, Syria, Yemen, sharing testimonies about visions, healings, and encounters with someone they called Jesus. These weren't polished productions. They were raw, terrified, urgent whispers from people who knew that speaking these words could cost them everything. I deleted the entire folder twice out of sheer panic, and downloaded it again both times because something inside me, something deeper than fear, stronger than training, hungered for whatever these people had found. For 3 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the perfect Saudi diplomat, attending lectures, networking at embassy events, representing my family's honor. By night, I was a criminal, watching forbidden testimonies with headphones pressed tight against my ears, curtains drawn, heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I felt like I was committing treason. But I also felt something I had never experienced in 27 years of Islamic devotion: peace. Not the peace of certainty, but the peace of finally asking the right questions. The breaking point came on a January night in 2018. I was watching a testimony from an Iranian soldier, a man who had killed in the name of Allah, who had enforced Sharia law without mercy, who had everything to lose. He described a dream where Jesus appeared to him, touched his chest, and spoke 3 words: "You are mine." As this battle-hardened soldier wept on camera, something inside me cracked open. Tears poured down my face, tears I didn't understand, couldn't control, hadn't cried since childhood. I was a Saudi prince. We don't break. We don't question. We don't cry over testimonies from enemies of Islam. But I did. And in that moment of unexpected brokenness, I whispered my first prayer to someone other than Allah. If you are real, show me. What happened next, I cannot explain with logic or reason. Warmth spread across my chest, not emotional warmth, but physical heat, as if someone had placed a hand over my heart. A presence filled my small London flat, gentle but utterly overwhelming, terrifying but somehow safe. I fell from my chair to my knees, shaking uncontrollably, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except feel the reality of someone in the room with me. No voice spoke. No vision appeared. But I knew, with a certainty that shattered every religious framework I had ever built, that I was not alone. That night, I slept with a peace so profound it felt like coming home after a lifetime of exile. When I returned to Saudi Arabia 3 months later, I thought I could bury what had happened. I thought I could return to my scripted life, pretend London was just a phase, and be the prince my father needed me to be. I thought I could forget the USB drive, the testimonies, the warmth, the presence. But Jesus had already planted his seed inside me. And seeds don't stay buried forever. To understand how far I fell, or how high I was lifted, you need to understand where I started. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the world that shaped me long before Jesus called my name. I was born inside the royal district of Tabuk, where power wasn't just inherited, it was breathed into you from your first cry. Our palace stood like a fortress of legacy, its limestone walls carved by hands that had served my family for generations. Those walls had witnessed the rise of kingdoms, the fall of rebellions, and the careful preservation of a bloodline that traced back to the founding of modern Saudi Arabia. My earliest memories are not of toys or laughter, but of duty. My father, Governor Rashad Al Saud, was a man whose silence carried more weight than most main speeches. He governed our province with an iron fist wrapped in religious righteousness. My older brother, Prince Faris, was his mirror image, disciplined, calculating, destined to inherit the full weight of our father's political empire. I was the spare heir, the second son, groomed not to lead but to support, to be the loyal sword arm of my brother's future reign. A prince's duty is obedience, honor, and legacy. My father spoke these words, so often they became the rhythm of my childhood heartbeat. Before I could read storybooks, I was reading the Quran. Before I learned mathematics, I learned Hadith. Tutors moved through our palace like priests through a temple, each one adding another layer to the foundation of my Islamic education. By age 10, I had memorized all 114 surahs of the Quran, 6,236 verses committed to memory through repetition, discipline, and the fear of disappointing men who never smiled but always watched. My father would gather religious scholars to test me, and I would recite flawlessly while he nodded with satisfaction. This one, he would tell visiting dignitaries, will lead with unshakable Islamic conviction. But memorization is not understanding, and conviction can be performed without being felt. My education expanded beyond religion into the machinery of power. I studied Islamic jurisprudence, learning how to interpret Sharia law and apply it to governance. I trained in diplomatic protocol, mastering the art of saying much while revealing nothing. Military strategy, economic policy, tribal negotiations, every skill designed to make me an extension of the kingdom's will. The surveillance was suffocating. Palace guards reported our movements. Tutors monitored our questions. Even our prayers were observed to ensure proper form and devotion. Every breath was measured against the standard of royal perfection. Every step was scripted long before I took it. I became exactly what they wanted: the perfect son, the perfect student, the perfect Muslim prince. I led prayers at the district mosque during Ramadan, my voice echoing through marble columns while hundreds bowed behind me. I fasted with flawless discipline, never once breaking before sunset. I gave generous zakat to approved Islamic charities, always with photographers present to document my piety. I debated Quranic interpretation with visiting scholars, impressing them with my knowledge and orthodoxy. Yet beneath the performance, beneath the memorized verses and scripted devotion, something gnawed at me, a restlessness I had no language to name, an emptiness I couldn't acknowledge without betraying everything I was supposed to be. Why did obedience feel like suffocation? Why did legacy feel like a prison? Why did I feel most alone when surrounded by thousands of worshippers? I never spoke these questions aloud. To question was to betray. To doubt was to dishonor. So I buried them deep and wore my golden chains with a smile that never reached my eyes. Through my teenage years and into early adulthood, I maintained the illusion perfectly. No one suspected the hollowness behind my certainty. Not my father. Not my brother. Not even myself. I had become so skilled at performing faith that I almost believed my own act. I thought my path was set in stone, carved as deeply as those ancient limestone walls that surrounded my childhood. I had no idea God was preparing me for a collision course with destiny. In September 2017, I boarded a private jet to London with my father's final words still echoing in my ears: "Remember who you are. Remember what you represent." I was 26 years old and had never been alone. The postgraduate program at the London School of Diplomacy was designed for people like me, future governors, ambassadors, policy architects. It was meant to polish my international profile, expand my network of influence, and prove that Saudi royalty could navigate Western corridors of power without compromising Islamic values. What I didn't expect was the air. London felt different. Not just the weather or the architecture, but something invisible and intoxicating: freedom. People argued about religion in cafes without lowering their voices. Students questioned their professors without fear of punishment. Women walked unveiled, laughing loudly, claiming space as if they had every right to exist fully. For the first time in my life, I could think without someone listening. I could breathe without someone measuring. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. To maintain my diplomatic trajectory, I joined the International Leadership Forum, an exclusive club for future world shapers. The membership read like a preview of the next generation's power players: a German chancellor's daughter, a Chinese tech heir, the son of a Brazilian oil magnate. Our meetings were sophisticated affairs held in oak-paneled rooms, discussing global markets and geopolitical strategy over wine I pretended to sip. Safe. Predictable. Perfectly aligned with my father's expectations. Until the evening of 12th October, when everything shifted. The meeting had followed its usual format: networking, presentations, carefully rehearsed insights designed to impress rather than reveal. I was mentally composing my weekly report to my father, documenting names and strategic connections, when the moderator introduced the final speaker. Halima Okonkwo will share her perspective on leadership through adversity. She was small, perhaps 5'2", with kind eyes and a quiet presence that seemed almost apologetic. A scholarship student from Lagos, I later learned, someone who didn't belong in rooms like this by birth, only by merit. She spoke about poverty that would have killed most people. No running water. No electricity. Watching siblings die from preventable diseases. Hunger that lasted weeks, not hours. Her voice was steady, factual, carrying trauma without drowning in it. Then she said something that seemed to crack the air itself. Everything changed when Jesus walked into my life. I tensed, expecting the room to erupt. We were diplomats in training. We knew which words were weapons, which topics were landmines. Religion was something you navigated carefully, mentioned vaguely, never proclaimed. But no one mocked. No one shifted uncomfortably or changed the subject. The room held its breath. Halima continued, describing a transformation that defied economic logic or social mobility. She spoke about peace in the midst of chaos, hope that survived loss, and a love that asked nothing but gave everything. She wasn't performing faith or reciting doctrine. She was describing something alive, a relationship, not a religion. I had heard thousands of religious speeches. I had delivered hundreds myself. But I had never heard anything like this. When the meeting ended, I found myself walking toward her, my heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with hunger. I approached carefully, diplomatically, as if making polite conversation. Your testimony was compelling, I said, choosing words that revealed nothing. Halima studied my face for a long moment. Then she smiled, not the political smile I was used to, but something genuine and knowing. You seem like a man searching for something, she said softly, pressing a small USB drive into my palm. Watch these when you are alone. Delete them if you must. But watch them first. I should have refused. I should have returned it immediately. I was a Saudi prince. Anything on that drive could be contraband, propaganda, a security risk my handlers would crucify me for possessing. But I closed my fingers around it. That night in my flat, I stared at the USB drive for an hour before plugging it in. Inside were dozens of video files, each labeled with a country and a first name: Syria_Ahmad, Iran_Mariam, Egypt_Karim. Underground believers. Testimonies from across the Middle East. People risking execution to speak about encounters with Jesus. I watched the first video. Then deleted the entire folder in panic. Downloaded it again 10 minutes later. Deleted it again the next morning. Downloaded it that night. For 3 months, I lived a schizophrenic existence. By day, I was Prince Khalid, attending lectures, networking at embassy events, filing reports that assured my father I remained his loyal son. By night, I was someone I didn't recognize, curtains drawn, headphones pressed tight, watching forbidden testimonies with my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt like a criminal, a traitor, a man unraveling everything he'd been built to be. But I also felt something I had never experienced in 26 years of Islamic devotion: peace. Not certainty, peace. The peace of finally asking questions I'd buried my entire life. I was watching those videos like a man dying of thirst watching others drink from a well. And I didn't even know I was thirsty. The videos became my secret obsession. Every night after my coursework, after the diplomatic dinners and networking events, after I had performed the role of Saudi prince to perfection, I would return to my flat and descend into another world. A world where ordinary people spoke about an extraordinary God with a conviction that made my years of religious training feel hollow. I watched testimonies from Iran, former revolutionary guards who had enforced Islamic law with violence, now weeping over grace they didn't deserve. I watched Egyptian Muslims describe dreams where a man in white called them by name. I watched Afghan refugees speak about healing that defied medical explanation, peace that survived war, hope that outlasted persecution. These people had nothing. Yet they had everything. I had everything. Yet I had nothing. By January 2018, I had watched every video at least twice. Some I had watched dozens of times, searching for the secret ingredient that transformed terror into worship, death sentences into testimonies. What did they know that I didn't? What had they found that all my Quranic memorization and Islamic jurisprudence couldn't provide? Then, on a frigid Tuesday night, I clicked on a file I had been avoiding, Iran_Raja. The video quality was poor, filmed on a phone in what looked like a basement, with shadows dancing across the speaker's face. The man was perhaps 40, with a soldier's bearing and scars that told stories his mouth wouldn't. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. "I kill for Allah," he said in Farsi, which I understood perfectly. "I enforced Sharia without mercy. I believed I was righteous." He described years of military service, brutal raids, executions he had witnessed and participated in. Then he described a dream. "I saw a man in white standing in a field of red poppies. He walked toward me, and I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. When he reached me, he placed his hand on my chest." Raja's voice broke. "And he said 3 words, 'You are mine.'" Tears streamed down the soldier's scarred face. I woke up weeping. I, who had not cried since I was a child, who had trained myself to feel nothing, could not stop weeping. Because I knew that the man in white was Jesus. And he wanted me. Not my works. Not my righteousness. Me. Something inside my chest cracked open. Tears poured down my face, hot, unexpected, unstoppable. I was a Saudi prince. We don't break. We don't cry over testimonies from enemies of Islam. We don't let emotion override training. But I couldn't stop. I hadn't cried since I was 7 years old, when my father had slapped the tears from my face and told me princes don't show weakness. I had buried that part of myself so deep I thought it was dead. Now it was drowning me. Through blurred vision, I paused the video. My hands were shaking. My breath came in gasps. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and someone, was calling me to jump. I slid from my chair to my knees on the cold floor. And for the first time in my life, I prayed to someone other than Allah. "If you are real." My voice was barely a whisper. "Show me." What happened next? I cannot explain with logic or reason or any framework I had been trained to use. Warmth spread across my chest, not emotional warmth, but physical heat, as if a hand had been placed over my heart. It radiated outward, filling my arms, my legs, my entire body with a presence that was both gentle and utterly overwhelming. The temperature in the room didn't change, but I felt like I was standing next to a fire. Then the presence intensified. My small London flat, cold, impersonal, foreign, suddenly felt full. Not crowded, but inhabited. Occupied by someone whose reality made everything else feel like shadow. I couldn't see anything. I heard no voice. But I knew with absolute certainty that I was not alone. Terror gripped me. This was power beyond anything I had encountered, beyond my father's authority, beyond the kingdom's reach, beyond the boundaries of everything I thought was possible. But beneath the terror was something else: safety, comfort, the sense of being known, not just observed or monitored or judged, but truly, deeply, completely known. And still wanted. I collapsed forward, forehead pressed against the floor, trembling uncontrollably. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes. Hours. Time felt suspended, irrelevant. When I finally crawled into bed, exhausted and empty and somehow full, I fell into the deepest sleep of my life. No dreams. No nightmares. Just peace, profound, unexplainable, unshakable peace. The next morning, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Emotion. Exhaustion. Stress from living a double life. Psychological response to months of secret videos. My mind offered a dozen explanations that required no supernatural intervention. But the peace remained. Not as a feeling that would fade, but as a seal pressed into my heart, a mark that said I belonged to someone now, whether I fully understood it or not. I didn't know it then, but that night, I stopped being Prince Khalid bin Rashad Al Saud. I became something the kingdom had no word for, a follower of Christ. In March 2018, I returned to Saudi Arabia with a carefully constructed plan. I would forget everything that happened in London. I would bury the testimonies, dismiss the encounter, and return to being the prince my father needed me to be. I would go back to normal. I would forget. I would be the prince they expected. But you cannot unlearn truth. And you cannot unknow someone who has already made himself known. Jesus had planted his seed inside me. And seeds don't ask permission to grow. The first weeks back in Tabuk were a masterclass in performance. I attended family dinners, discussing provincial politics with the appropriate gravitas. I met with tribal leaders, demonstrating the diplomatic skill my London education had refined. I led Friday prayers at the district mosque, my voice echoing through marble columns with practiced perfection. Everyone commented on how mature I seemed, how focused, how ready for greater responsibility. No one noticed I was dying inside. Then Ramadan arrived, Islam's holiest month, the spiritual pinnacle every devout Muslim anticipates. The month when heaven's gates open wide, and Allah draws nearest to those who fast and pray with sincere hearts. I had observed Ramadan perfectly for 18 years. But this year felt different. This year, the hunger for truth consumed me far more than the hunger for food. By day, I fasted as expected, no food, no water from dawn until sunset, performing every ritual with meticulous precision. My father watched me with approval, proud of his son's unwavering devotion. But at night, after the iftar meal, after the extended Taraweeh prayers, after everyone had retreated to their quarters, I would lock myself in my private library and do something that could get me killed. I had smuggled back something more dangerous than drugs or weapons. I had brought back Halima's USB drive and, hidden in encrypted files on my laptop, digital copies of the Gospels. Night after night, I compared them. Jesus' words in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John against everything I had memorized from the Quran and Hadith. The contrast became undeniable. Grace versus works. Jesus offered forgiveness as a gift. Islam demanded perfection as payment. Love versus fear. Jesus invited relationship. Islam required submission. Finished work versus endless striving. Jesus said, "It is finished," on the cross. Islam said, "Perhaps Allah will have mercy," after a lifetime of uncertainty. One taught me I could never be good enough. The other told me I didn't have to be. The breaking point came on the 27th night of Ramadan, Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power, Islam's most sacred evening. While my family and thousands of others filled the mosques, praying for Allah's favor, I sat alone in my library, curtains drawn, staring at words that had demolished my entire worldview. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Not might have eternal life if you are good enough. Not could have it if you perform enough rituals. Shall have it. Certainty. Promise. Gift. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop. The palace was silent except for distant prayers echoing from the mosque. Everyone I knew was seeking Allah. And I was about to betray everything they believed. I knelt on the Persian rug, not facing Mecca, but simply facing the truth I could no longer deny. The words came as a whisper, barely audible even to myself. Jesus, I give you my heart. I am yours. No thunder, no light, no dramatic presence like I had felt in London. Just a quiet, profound sense of rightness, like a bone slipping back into joint, like an exile finally coming home. And in that silence, everything changed. The moment the prayer left my lips, I felt two things simultaneously: overwhelming liberation and absolute terror. Liberation because I had finally stopped performing and started belonging. Terror because I knew exactly what I had just done. Apostasy in Saudi Arabia carries one sentence: death. Religious police don't negotiate. Courts don't show mercy. Family connections might delay execution, but they wouldn't prevent it. The moment my conversion became known, my life would be measured in days, not years. From that moment forward, my life became a countdown to a death sentence. The realization should have made me recant, should have sent me running back to the mosque, begging Allah's forgiveness, burying this dangerous truth before it buried me. Instead, the peace intensified. The first days as a secret believer were excruciating. I became hyper-aware of every camera, every guard, every servant who might notice something different. I watched my words with paranoid precision, terrified that truth would slip out in an unguarded moment. I felt like a spy in my own home, hiding the most important part of myself from everyone I knew. The isolation was crushing. I couldn't tell my father, couldn't confide in my brother, couldn't trust anyone with the secret that made me both fully alive and legally dead. But beneath the fear, beneath the paranoia, beneath the suffocating isolation, something was growing, a peace that didn't depend on circumstances, a joy that survived terror, a certainty that outlasted doubt. I had crossed a line. There was no going back. And I didn't want to. I didn't intend to preach. Not at first. I just wanted to survive. Keep my head down. Maintain my cover. Stay alive long enough to figure out what being a follower of Jesus actually meant in a kingdom where his name was blasphemy. But truth doesn't stay silent forever. It burns inside you like a fire, and eventually, smoke escapes. The first crack in my silence came during a late-night walk with my cousin, Ahmad. We had grown up together, shared tutors, memorized Quran side by side. He was lamenting the emptiness of his engagement to a woman chosen for political alliance, and I heard myself say words I hadn't planned. What if there was a love that chose you first? Not for advantage, but just because you're you. Ahmad stopped walking. What are you talking about? My heart hammered. I had already said too much. But I also couldn't stop. Have you ever wondered if there's more than what we've been taught? That conversation lasted 3 hours. I didn't tell him everything, not yet. But I planted a seed. 2 weeks later, my Palais driver, Hassan, asked why I seemed different. We were alone in the car, stuck in Jeddah traffic, and something about his genuine curiosity made me risk everything. Can I tell you something that might change your life? I asked. Hassan met my eyes in the rearview mirror. Please. I told him about London, about the testimonies, about the night Jesus became real to me. Hassan listened without interrupting, tears streaming down his weathered face. When I finished, he whispered, I've been waiting my whole life for someone to tell me this. Then I discovered something that changed everything, an anonymous online chat group of young Saudis questioning Islam. 23 members, using encrypted messaging, asking dangerous questions in careful code. Someone had invited me, perhaps recognizing something in my recent online activity. I watched their conversations for weeks before contributing. Then, one night, someone asked, has anyone here ever felt like Islam is missing something? I typed carefully, I have. And I found what was missing. The responses came like a flood. Tell us. Please. We are dying for truth. So I did. Within 3 months, I was secretly meeting with nearly 40 people across Jeddah and Tabuk. We gathered in places where surveillance couldn't reach, parking garages at midnight, abandoned farms outside the city, desert tents miles from any road. We used encrypted phones, spoke in code, and changed meeting locations constantly. The fear was suffocating. Every car that passed felt like religious police. Every unfamiliar face felt like an informant. I checked my phone obsessively for signs we'd been compromised. But God began moving in ways that defied fear. A 17-year-old girl named Lila had suffered from chronic migraine since childhood, pain so severe she could barely function. When we prayed for her in a dusty warehouse, something shifted. Her eyes went wide. It's gone, she whispered. The pain, it's completely gone. That was 4 months ago. The migraines never returned. Hassan's son, Khalid, yes, named after me, had been suicidal, drowning in depression and purposelessness. 3 days after his father shared the gospel with him, the boy woke from a dream, shaking. I saw a man in white, he told us, pulling me out of a dark pit. He said, I have plans for you. The depression lifted like fog before sunrise. The boy who had been planning his death started planning his future. Then there was Rashid, a wealthy businessman who had everything money could buy and nothing that made life worth living. He showed up to a secret meeting in a desert tent, skeptical and desperate. When I explained grace, that salvation was a gift, not a transaction, he broke. "I've spent millions on charity, trying to buy Allah's favor," he sobbed. "And I still feel empty. You are telling me I could have just received it?" "Yes," I said simply. He wept for an hour, feeling a peace he said he couldn't buy with all the gold in Arabia. Small house churches began forming. 3 people here, 5 there, 8 in another location. Secret believers multiplying like wildfire across the province. Each testimony made me braver. Each miracle made me bolder. I was watching God move in Saudi Arabia, with power that rendered our surveillance state helpless. What could cameras see that God couldn't override? What could religious police stop that the Holy Spirit had started? My boldness grew dangerous. I started taking risks I shouldn't have. Meeting in places that weren't secure enough. Trusting people I hadn't vetted carefully. Speaking more freely because I was intoxicated by the harvest, drunk on watching Jesus transform lives that Islam had left broken. The internal conflict was constant. Joy at seeing lives transformed versus the growing certainty that I was being watched. Every new believer was a victory. Every new meeting was another chance to be discovered. I should have been more careful. Should have remembered who I was, not just a believer, but a prince. Should have known that the royal family watches everything, and betrayal often wears a familiar face. But I was so focused on the harvest, I didn't see the trap closing around me. I didn't notice my older brother, Faris, watching me with narrowed eyes. Didn't catch his questions about my late-night absences, or his sudden interest in my schedule. I was so focused on the harvest, I didn't see the trap closing around me. 23rd July, 2020. The night that changed everything. I was meeting with 2 underground believers behind an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Tabuk, a location we had used 3 times before without incident. Ahmad, my cousin, and a new believer named Fatima who had questions about baptism. We stood in the shadow of rusted shipping containers, speaking in hushed voices about new life in Christ. The desert wind carried our words away into darkness. I felt safe, protected, invisible. I didn't know my older brother, Prince Faris, had followed me. He watched from the shadows 50 meters away, phone raised, recording every word, every gesture, every prayer, building a case against his own blood with the patience of a predator. When I returned home that night, I slept peacefully, dreaming of the baptism we were planning for next week. I woke to boots on my throat. Dawn had barely broken when the religious police, the Mutaveen, stormed my guest house. 6 men in traditional dress, faces hard with righteous fury, dragging me from my bed in my sleeping clothes. Apostate. One spat, striking me across the face. My phones were confiscated. My laptop seized. My rooms torn apart while I was forced to my knees, hands zip-tied behind my back so tight the plastic cut into my wrists. "You will tell us everything," the lead officer hissed. "Names. Locations. How many you've corrupted with your poison." They dragged me to a detention center I didn't know existed, a black site where princes could disappear without scandal. The next 6 days were a descent into hell. Sleep deprivation. Slapping that left my ears ringing. Hours standing against walls in stress positions until my legs gave out. Psychological torture designed to break me without leaving permanent marks. Who converted you? How many have you corrupted? Where are the others? The same questions, over and over, voices layered with disgust and rage. I gave them nothing. No names. No locations. No betrayals. Every strike I absorbed was one that wouldn't fall on Ahmad, or Hassan, or Laila, or the 40 others whose faces I held sacred in my heart. Let them break me. Let them destroy me. But I would not, could not, Hand my brothers and sisters to the executioner. On the third day, they brought in my father. I had been awake for 72 hours, slumped in a metal chair, face swollen, body screaming. When the door opened and Governor Rashad al-Saud entered, I almost didn't recognize him. Not because of my condition, but because I had never seen him look so old. He didn't yell, didn't strike me, didn't unleash the fury I expected. He simply sat across from me in silence that lasted an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of collapsed empires. Choose your bloodline or your blasphemy. 4 generations of legacy hung in that ultimatum. Everything our family had built. Everything I was born to inherit. The weight of a name that opened doors across the kingdom. On one side, life, wealth, power, family, honor. On the other, a carpenter from Nazareth who died on a cross. I met my father's eyes that had watched me memorize my first Quranic verse, that had swelled with pride at my achievements, that now held only devastation. I choose Jesus, I whispered. Something broke in my father's face. Not anger. Worse. The death of hope. He stood slowly, like a man carrying impossible weight, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused without turning. You are no longer my son. The door closed. I never saw him again. The trial was theater, quick, predetermined, ceremonial. A religious court convened within 48 hours, its verdict written before the first witness spoke. Charges: apostasy, illegal evangelical activity, corruption of believers. Religious scholars I had once studied under testified against me, playing recordings Faris had made. My own voice echoed through the courtroom. Jesus is Lord. He died for your sins. I was Muslim, but now I follow Christ. I wasn't allowed to speak in my defense. No appeal was permitted. No mercy was possible. The verdict came with mechanical efficiency. Public beheading in Jeddah Square. Execution date: 11th August, 2020. I should have felt terror, rage, desperation. Instead, I felt peace. A peace that made no logical sense, that defied every survival instinct, that could only come from someone whose kingdom wasn't threatened by earthly powers. As guards escorted me back to my cell, I remembered Jesus' words I had read in that London flat a lifetime ago. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I had 7 days before the execution. 7 days to pray. 7 days to prepare to meet the one I had given everything for. And as I knelt on the cold floor of my cell that first night, chains heavy on my wrists, I prayed not for rescue but for readiness. Jesus, I whispered into the darkness, if this is my end, let it testify to your beginning. Let my blood water seeds you've already planted. Let my death prove that you are worth dying for. The peace intensified until it felt like armor. I was ready. 11th August, 2020. Dawn broke over Jeddah like a blade, sharp, merciless, final. They had scheduled my execution for 5:47 a.m., precisely calculated to occur before international media could mobilize, before embassies could intervene, before my death could become inconvenient publicity. The guards came for me while darkness still clung to the edges of the sky. They stripped me of the prison garment and left me barefoot, chains heavy on my wrists and ankles. Every step toward the transport vehicle was a countdown. The drive to Jeddah Square took 12 minutes. I counted each one. When we arrived, a crowd had already gathered despite the early hour, religious officials in crisp white thobes, soldiers with automatic rifles, curious onlookers who had come to witness righteous justice. Perhaps 200 people, their faces blurred by my exhaustion and strange, supernatural calm. The square itself was ancient, stained with the blood of centuries of executions. How many had knelt here before me? How many had died for crimes far less than speaking the name of Jesus? The execution ritual was precise, ceremonial, designed to strip away dignity before taking life. A religious official read the charges in a voice that echoed across the square. Prince Khalid bin Rashad Al Saud stands condemned for the crimes of apostasy, corruption of believers, and evangelical activity against Islam. The sentence is death by beheading, to be carried out immediately. He turned to me. Do you recant your apostasy? Do you return to Islam and renounce the false prophet Jesus? Every eye fixed on me. This was my final chance, the moment where fear was supposed to override conviction, where survival instinct was meant to crush faith. I met his gaze steadily. Jesus Christ is Lord. He is the way, the truth, and the life. I will not, I cannot, deny him. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The official's face hardened with righteous disgust. Then you die as an enemy of Allah. They forced a black hood over my head, plunging me into suffocating darkness. Strong hands pushed me to my knees. The sand was cold beneath me, morning dew still clinging to the ground. I heard the executioner approach, his footsteps measured, practiced. The ceremonial sword being drawn from its sheath, the sound of steel singing in the dawn air. That blade was razor-sharp, designed for a single, clean strike. My heart was surprisingly steady. No panic. No regret. Only peace and one final prayer. Jesus, you brought me here. Let your will be done. I heard the executioner take his stance behind me. Heard his breath as he raised the sword high. Felt the air shift as the blade began its descent. Then, a sound tore through the silence, like thunder splitting the sky, like mountains cracking, like the voice of God himself declaring, "Enough." The ground beneath my knees began to vibrate violently. Not an earthquake, something else. Something alive with power. Guards shouted in terror. Camels tethered nearby wailed, a sound I had never heard from animals, pure primal fear. People screamed. Then came the light. A blinding white light burst across Jeddah Square, with an intensity that penetrated even the black hood covering my face. It wasn't natural light, wasn't the sun rising or spotlights or anything of this world. It was glory, concentrated and overwhelming. I heard my chains snap. Not the sound of a lock being picked or bolts being cut, the sound of heavy steel breaking, like paper tearing, like glass shattering. The metal that had bound my wrists fell away. An unseen force lifted me to my feet, gentle but irresistible, like being carried by wind that knew my name. The hood flew off my head. I opened my eyes to chaos. Guards stumbling backward, hands covering their faces. The executioner unconscious on the ground, his sword fallen beside him. People fleeing in every direction, trampling each other in their terror. And standing directly behind me, radiant and terrifying and beautiful beyond description, was a man clothed in white. His face shone like the sun, not metaphorically, but literally, blazing with light that should have destroyed me but instead felt like coming home. His eyes held galaxies. His presence filled the square until nothing else mattered. Jesus. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to do anything except stare at the one who had walked into my execution. He spoke, and his voice carried the weight of eternity and the gentleness of love. My son, your time is not finished. Then he gestured toward the desert, beyond the panicking crowd, toward freedom I shouldn't have been able to reach. Go. My children are waiting. The chaos intensified, guards blinded by the light, officials collapsed in terror, soldiers firing weapons at shadows because they couldn't see what was real anymore. And I walked. Straight through the panicked crowd, chains gone, barefoot on sand that should have been soaked with my blood. No one stopped me. No one even saw me. I moved through them like wind, like shadow, like someone protected by a power that rendered earthly authority meaningless. At the edge of the square, I turned back once. The light was already fading. Jesus was gone, or perhaps I could no longer see him. But the executioner's sword still lay in the sand. And I was still breathing. I walked out of my execution like Peter walked out of prison. Because when Jesus opens a door, no man, no kingdom, no power on earth or hell can shut it. By nightfall, I was in the back of a smuggler's truck, hidden beneath crates of dates and spices, rattling across the desert toward a border I had never needed permission to cross. The believers who arranged my escape were people I had never met. An underground network of Christians, risking everything to save a brother they knew only through whispered prayers and encrypted messages. They moved me like a package marked, fragile, and eternal, passing me from safe house to safe house with the efficiency of people who had done this before. Jordan first, then Lebanon. Each border crossing a miracle of forged documents and divine favor. Then a cargo plane to Southeast Asia, where I disappeared into the millions of faces that make anonymity possible. Today, I live under a new identity somewhere in this region, a location I cannot disclose, a name I cannot speak. The Saudi government has placed a bounty on my head. Interpol has my photograph. My family has declared me dead. But I have never been more alive. My mission now is the same as it was in those secret meetings in Tabuk, preaching the gospel to those who need it most. I work among Muslim refugees fleeing war and persecution, Syrians, Afghans, Rohingya, people who have lost everything except the breath in their lungs and questions in their hearts. And every time I open my mouth to speak about Jesus, I remember one truth. No kingdom on earth, no sword of man, can stop the King of Kings when he steps into your story. I have lost everything the world calls valuable. My family. My father will not speak my name. My brother would kill me on sight. My title. I am no longer Prince Khalid, just Khalid, a ghost with no bloodline. My wealth. The bank accounts are frozen, the property seized, the inheritance erased. My homeland. I can never return to the limestone palace where I learned to walk, the mosques where I learned to pray, the desert that taught me silence. I have lost my past, my identity, my place in the world. But what I gained? Everything. I traded a temporary crown for an eternal one. My work here is simple but profound, helping other ex-Muslims find the Jesus who found me, discipling new believers who are navigating the same dangerous journey I walked, teaching them that following Christ doesn't mean safety, it means worth, that the cost is high, but Jesus is higher. The danger hasn't ended. The Saudi government actively hunts me. Bounty hunters have come close twice. Radical groups would celebrate my execution as justice delayed but delivered. But fear no longer controls me. They can kill my body, but they already lost my soul. And the miracles? They haven't stopped. Last month, an Afghan woman had a dream of a man in white telling her to find the teacher by the river. She found our small gathering by a polluted canal and wept when she saw me. "You were in my dream," she said. "He told me you would show me the way home." A Syrian boy, blind from a bombing, regained sight after we prayed, not fully, but enough to see faces again, enough to see hope. A Pakistani man, suicidal from trauma, felt peace for the first time in 7 years when he whispered Jesus' name. The God who split chains in Jeddah Square is still splitting chains today. Let me tell you something. If Jesus can save a Saudi prince, he can save anyone. Your past doesn't disqualify you. Your religion doesn't disqualify you. Your sins, no matter how dark, how shameful, how permanent they feel, don't disqualify you. Jesus didn't die for the qualified. He died for the desperate. Maybe you are watching this from Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, or anywhere Islam rules with an iron fist. Maybe you are secretly questioning, secretly searching, secretly wondering if there's more than what you've been taught. Jesus sees you. He knows your name. He's calling you. I know the cost. I've paid it. I know the fear. It's real. It's rational. It's overwhelming. I know what you stand to lose. Family, honor, safety, everything that makes life feel stable. But I also know what you stand to gain. Jesus himself. And he is worth it. Worth the loss. Worth the pain. Worth the sword raised above your neck. Because the sword was raised above mine, and Jesus was higher. 3 years ago, I knelt in an execution square, waiting to die. Today, I kneel in a refugee camp, watching people come to life. The location changed. The mission didn't. My name is Prince Khalid bin Rashad Al Saud. I was born to rule a province. But Jesus made me an heir to the kingdom of heaven. And that is a title no man, no government, no sword can ever take away. If this testimony touched your heart, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and what time it is there. Your engagement helps YouTube show these stories to others who are searching for truth. And if you are that person, the one secretly searching, secretly hoping, secretly wondering if Jesus is real, he is. And he's waiting for you. Not with a sword. With open arms.